𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪 and welcome to Jai Hind classes 𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪. In this video, I'll explain the theme 8 of class 11th history from the section 3rd, that is changing traditions. The chapter or the theme that we have got for this chapter is Confrontation of Cultures. So confrontation of cultures, as in the previous session or previous theme, what we talked about was the changing cultural traditions. We saw that how traditions, culture got changed into Europe. In this chapter, we will see confrontation of culture. That means these cultures include the American culture and the European culture. In this, we will see from 15th to 17th century how many Europeans explored different parts of America, whether it be South America, Central America or North America, between the Caribbean, Brazil region and those regions of America. It also had disastrous consequences for the native of those areas, as they had been not involved with any of the politics or any of the things going on in the world. They were explored by the Europeans in the 15th and 17th century. The first ones to do this were the Spanish and Portuguese. They had asked the Pope to give them the exclusive rights to rule over the new territory which they have explored in different regions of the world. When they found this region, it was actually in search of spices and silver and gold. They were looking for India, which they had read in the travels of Marco Polo. There is one great person in this exploration who was Christopher Columbus. Now this Christopher Columbus had read about in this region. In this region is India and the countries east of India. He had read about Indies in the travels of Marco Polo and had sailed to explore this region. When he went there, he found American region and thought it was Indies. Later did they find that it was not. They found out that their culture was different and a new continent has been explored, has been found out by those people. Settlements began in American continent. Also, it was the starting of the slave trade, with Europeans selling slaves from Africa to work in mines and plantations in America. So how did this happen? We'll see in this chapter, because exploring America was such a big thing, and moreover what happened that it also led to the slave trade, which had also disastrous consequences impact on the natives of that region. The American continent included very subsistence economies in small regions of Caribbean and Brazil. On the other hand, they also included monarchical big groups or communities living in Central America and South America, like the Aztecs, the Incas of Peru and the Mayas, that we'll see later in this chapter. So how did this all happen? We'll see in this chapter. Let's talk about some of the sources for this chapter. You know what, that we can't just find everything about this, because it had a lot of destruction. When Europeans went there, had settlement over in America, they had a lot of destruction. They destroyed many parts of America and also ruined their monuments, their manuscripts that were written by them. What we can find today is more about European point of view, like how they saw European settlements instead of the culture of those people. It was only in the late 19th century when there was more focus on the culture of those people who lived in America during that time, because we can't just find everything today, as all those things have been ruined or destroyed by Europeans. Besides that, we also have flying over the areas, we can see that there are many densely villages, like those villages that have been covered with densely forests. So you could say by the time has passed by, there were no one going and coming around in that region, and it got just disappeared from this world. So we have found so many things, but still we can't just find everything about the cultures, about the social, economical, political life of those people who live in America, the natives of the America. Instead, we find the European settlements, how they destroyed, what they did, how did they find those regions. We can only find that, and that's what we'll be talking more in this chapter. Also, we will see the culture of those people that has been found by us. So let's start the chapter with the first topic, that is Communities of the Caribbean and Brazil. So communities of the Caribbean and Brazil. Before that, let's talk about America. What do you know about it? We have two continents of America that are North America and South America, in which USA, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and all the other countries are lying. So do you really know about America? You know that most of the American region still is densely covered with forests. Also, there is Amazon River, the largest river of the world, with largest drainage basin of the world, that also flows in this region in South America. So we can say that this South America and North America are quite covered with forests, with so much forests, and they were more and more covered with forests in earlier times, but now the time has passed, it has happened. Now let's talk about people living in Caribbean Sea and the Brazil region. First, let's talk about the Caribbean Sea. There was one group that was 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 who lived in cluster of thousands of islands in the Great Antilles, in the Caribbean Sea. That is what is known today is Bahamas and Great Antilles. They were expelled from the Lesser Antilles by a fierce tribe known as Caribs. In contrast to them, these Arawaks were with negotiation side, they had peaceful mind and they preferred negotiation than a conflict. They also had some skilled boat builders, so they were sailing open in seas with dugout canoes. Also, what they did for a living was that they did fishing, agriculture. They grew corns, sweet potatoes, cassava and tubers. Cassava, it's like that is produced in South American region. Besides that, they also did hunting and fishing for a living. So it was quite a good area, so they did fishing and hunting as well. These Arawaks had been living there for many of the years. They also used gold and silver for them, but they never attached value to it. They never attached value, if the gold was so precious or something like that. They did have a lot of gold or silver in temples or something like that, but they never attached value to that. Instead, when Europeans came, they even exchanged their gold for the pearl or the beads, because they thought that it was more beautiful, as they had no value related to gold or silver. They also helped the Spanish to search for gold till the time when they were forced to resist after seeing the brutal, or you could say vicious acts or things done by the Spanish and the Europeans. So when they found the brutal things, findings and doings of those people, they were forced to resist. Also, they had a lot of impact because of the Europeans. When Europeans sailed over and had settled in this area, these people were very generous, so they had given all their hospitality, all their things, also helped them and did many things. In return, what happened that they were beaten or killed, and their way of life, they have been explicit. That means they have disappeared. You could say that it had European coming over had a lot of impact over these Arawakians. That is why their way of life and who were they was disappearing from the world, or even in some part of the world it was extinct. So that is what happened with 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. In Brazil, we had a people that is 𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓷. These people lived in Brazil region. You know that there is interesting fact about the name Brazil as well. This Brazil was derived because it was a dense forest. In this forest, there were many Brazil wood trees. So that is why this region is named as Brazil. So people who lived here did not have iron, so could not perform hunting, not hunting but agriculture. You know what, for agriculture we need land, but all the land was covered with forest here. That is why without having iron, they could not perform agriculture. Still, they had a lot of supply of fruits, vegetables, and of you could say fish, animals for hunting, so they did not have to do the agriculture part. Still they could lead their life with these things happily. So this was, you could say, these were subsistence economies with no kings, no army, no monarch, no hierarchies. That is why when Europeans came in this region, they were quite envious of these people as they had no obligation to follow. Also, there was a culture of animists and polygamy. Animists are those people who believe that even those things, scientific proven things that are non-living, may have a soul or a life. That is why they also do things in such a way that is they don't harm the other people, the other non-living things, not the people but the non-living things, because they are animists. So all the people living in Caribbean and you could say this Brazil region were animists, and polygamy was common in earlier times. So this is about the people living in Caribbean Sea and in the Brazil region. That is now a country. You might know that it's quite a big country and a very famous country as well. Now the second topic of this chapter is the state systems of Central and South America. So the state system of Central and South America, you know what, that till now we have seen, yes, there was a lot of subsistence economies and many other things. On the other hand, on contrary, you can say that in America there were also monarchical system who were quite strong, had based on agriculture, producing corns like the Aztecs, the Incas or the Mayas. So it was not that just these small economies were there. There were also hierarchies, there were also monarch system, kings, and their army, their people, and all those things were also there. Like state systems were also in South America and the Central America. So let's discuss about them one by one with our topics. The first one we'll talk about is the Aztecs. So the Aztecs. Now in 12th century, these Aztecs had migrated from north of America to the Central Valley of Mexico. This region, Mexico, got its name after the god Mextli. They were quite hierarchical as they were monarch system. Of course, there will be hierarchies. There were nobles who were by birth, or priests or others rewarded for their work, or rewarded by the government. And that is the king, not the government. Besides that, there were also traders who were rewarded. You could say that traders also served them as spies and ambassadors, because nobles, warriors and all the king were respected by the people. Also, traders had a role in the country. Besides that, wise teachers, all those physicians who had done the great work, and astronomers and many great people, artisans you could say, were also rewarded by the king, were also respected by the people. What happened that nobles chose among from them who would be the king. The king was the representative of the sun on the earth according to them. That is why it was said that it was the rule of that country that the king would have to serve the country. The king would be the king of the country until his death, until he dies. And after that there will be hereditary system, his son will take on, and that would go on. Besides that, there were hereditary system as well in priesthood and the noble work. For any other work, you need to get reward from the king. So you could say that this was the hierarchies. There were nobles, there was a king, priests, and all the people. Besides that, there was this thing that land was limited in you could say that they had defeated many tribes who were forced to pay tribute, because now they had migrated from the north of America to the to the Central Valley of Mexico. So now before that there were some groups in that region already, so they had to be defeated and were forced to pay tribute to the Aztecs. Aztecs had seen, the king had seen that the land was limited. As all of you know that land is always limited. So that is why they proclaimed reclamations. Reclamations is that converting wastelands into the use of land, like for you could say for settlement, for urbanization, for settlement, or for cultivation. What they did was that they had weaved a very large reed mat, covered it with mud and plants, and they were very fertile islands they made. So you could say that in 1325 the capital city was also built, that is Tenochtitlan. It was the capital city of the Aztecs. Talking about the education in this province, it is not a province but the group of people Aztecs. Talking about their education, what happened was that the children from the noble families, all those children were to go to different school for learning about learning the skills of running the religious matters and military matters. All the other students, all the other kids were allowed to go to different schools where they learned about history, religious ceremonies, myths, beliefs and agriculture, all of those things. Talking about the gender education, boys were taught the agriculture things and religious military things. Girls were taught about the domestic skills, you could say. That was a thing going on during that time. All the peasants, like the European serfs, had land under the control of the nobility. That is, they were doing the work, agricultural work on the lands of the nobility. In return, they got some harvest. Sometimes poor would sell their children as slaves. What was different that these slaves could reclaim their freedom after all. Like, as the time passes, if they are able to free themselves, then they can definitely free themselves from being slaves. That was different from the European case, as we have seen that in Europe there was nothing like that. If you are a slave, you have to be slave and would have to do work, and we have seen in the previous themes, haven't we? So you could say that this was a thing going on in the Aztecs. For the Aztecs, they were living in Mexican region. By the 16th century, there was quite a strain in the Aztec Empire because all those people who had been defeated were opposing the government, the king. Of course, who have been defeated, of course, would not feel good. In any case, they would not feel good. So that is why they were opposing more and more. And talking about agriculture, there was a lot of surplus production of corn in this region, you could say in Mexico region, by the Aztecs, because in America what you can find the most is corn, sweet potatoes and other things. So corn was very much produced in this by these people. Besides that, they also performed hunting, fishing and other activities done by them. So that was about the Aztecs. Now the next group that we're going to talk about is the Mayas. So the Mayas, now these people had ruled over Mexico between 11th century to 14th century. After that, they had less power because in 16th century they were quite less powerful in political matters compared to the Aztecs. What was important in this region was that people were highly skilled. They performed a lot of agriculture for corn. There was a lot of production of corn. Also, as people got money from the surplus production, they invested it in architecture, in the development of astronomy and mathematics. That is why some things could be seen. Some developments could be seen in different spheres of life, not just in agriculture or something like that, but development could be seen in the Mayas, by the Mayas people of Mexican region. So you could say that these two groups were from the same region, Mexico. The only thing that was different was that they were in the Central Valley, they were in the south or north of Mexico. So of course there would be some difference, but what was important was that they both ruled over and had less power in 16th century, and something their social economic culture was different from each other. Now the next community that we're going to talk about is the Incas of Peru. So the Incas of Peru. Now this Inca city of Machu Picchu was discovered in 1911, for your information. Now let's talk about these group of people. Now when we talk about these people, they were quite different. Like, we can talk a lot about these people. First Inca was Manco Capac, who established all this community or the empire. Not the community, but the empire in short terms. It has started from the region of Ecuador. It had extended at its highest peak by the 9th Inca from Ecuador to Chile, that is 3,000 miles. Also, this is also known as Quechuas. You can say Quechuas or Incas. These two terms are for the same people that they have in different languages. It was that when they had defeated a lot of tribes, all the defeated people were absorbed effectively. That is, they had to speak, everyone had to speak just one language, that was 𝓥𝓲𝓫. That is, it was the language spoken in the court. So everyone, whether it be the nobility or the defeated people, had to speak the same language. Besides that, there was also so much architecture work going on in the Inca region. You could say that people were making pyramids, were making so many different architecture as was ordered by the king. What happened that there was no technological thing, there was literally no technology during that time. They were skilled people like Aztecs. These people were also skilled, a lot skilled in making things, in buildings. You could say they were skilled builders. That is why when the pyramids were being built, you could say that a brick that is used for the pyramid may weigh 100 metric tons or even more than that. During that time, there were no wheeled vehicles to carry them for transportation. It was only the labor. So in short terms, it was that labor intensive things were going on by the Incas. That is why without even having wheeled vehicles, they were using the labor to transport from here to there. Masons were making these things by hands. Masons were performing these things that were quite labor intensive. In addition, in the Incas region, it was supported more and more. It was promoted more and more. These kind of work were promoted by the people. Talking about the agriculture was the basis of this empire. A lot of corn and other things were grown. Like Aztecs were growing the corn, manioc roots, pumpkins, or cassava tubers. These groups had main basis on the corn production. They were producing a lot of corn. Also, they developed many kind of new ways of irrigation and drainage. Much of their land was not irrigated, was not fertile. It was very infertile. What they did was that they made irrigation system so that agriculture would be performed in that region as well. In 1500, the agriculture in the Andean region was far much better than what it is today. So they developed very good quality, very good technique of agriculture by performing drainage basins, irrigation system, making canals, or many other things. Besides that, these Incas people, a lot of things were common with Aztecs as well. Like they also had the slavery things. That is, poor would sell their children as slaves. Later on, these slaves could buy back their freedom. So this was about the Incas. Now you might be thinking that they were quite similar. As they were empire, of course they will be similar to the European ones. But this was not the case. Incas and the Aztecs were similar, that were different from the European society. You know what, that in European society there was hierarchy, and in these two, Incas and the Aztecs, also there was hierarchy. What was different, that there was no private ownership of land by a handful of people in these two empires. That was just the opposite case in European societies, European countries. As all of you know that all the land would be in handful of the people. Secondly, the difference was there, that the slavery things. As I've told you that slaves could buy back their freedom, that was not possible in the European society. So in short terms, Incas and Aztecs were completely different with European. Thirdly, as all of you know that gods' temples were built in European societies as well as Incas and Aztecs. In Aztecs, as they were engaged more and more in wars, that is why they generally worshipped the god of wars or the sun, the god sun, or maybe like that. So what they did was different. Like they both built temples, they both were worshipping, they both had prayers, all of three, not both, but all of them had prayers or something like that. Incas and Aztecs also also had rituals. They also decorated the temples with gold and silver, but they never attached value to it. That is why they were not valuing these things. They were just they're practicing their personal faith and religious things. That was not the case in the European society. That was just the difference. They had attached a lot of value to the gold and silver, just opposite of that. So these two versus one, they were just in contrast. The American society was just in contrast with the European society. So how did the things happen? How did the things go on? We'll have to talk later about that. More talking about the Incas was that they also had developed one more thing. That is, no writing system was there. What was there was that some notes were there on cords. These notes have been said that they were mathematical units. Now it is being said they were some kind of secret code that has not been deciphered. So in short, you could say that in simple terms, it was that a little bit of art drawing was like that. Notes were thread notes were there on cords that was sealed as mathematical units. So research are going on, still being continued on this matter. Now the next topic that we have here is Voyages of Exploration by Europeans. So Voyages of Exploration by Europeans. Now let's talk about how these voyages started, the reasons behind it actually, not the beginning of these things. In 1477, Ptolemy's geography, which we talked a little about in the last theme, was available in printed papers. That was written, you may be surprised to know that this Ptolemy's geography was written 1300 years earlier, but was only available in 1477. After 1300 years, it was available in printed paper when the writer was not alive anymore. In that book, he had shown that the earth was designed. He had introduced the concept of latitude and longitudes. Also, he said that the earth was spherical. The only thing that he underestimated was the width of the oceans. He had underestimated the width of the oceans, which was unknown to the Europeans. Many sailors were quite confident that they could sail over the seas, oceans, as they had read the book, and now they had a better understanding of the world in which they were living. Earlier, many years ago, people used to believe that earth was flat. Now this changed to spherical. Also, the earth is not complete spherical. It is something else, something, in North Pole and South Pole it is a little bit flat. So the shape's name is something else. What it is, you have to find out. You know what, that latitude and longitude concept was very much important for the people to understand different types of concepts. Many pioneers in 15th century, there were two countries, Spain and Portugal, who were pioneers to these voyages of discovery, of explorations. People used to name these as voyages of discovery or voyages of exploration. Voyages of discovery, voyages into sailing. Later historians argued that this was not. Even in earlier years, countries, Arabs, China, countries such as China and people from Asia, from India, had already navigated in this American region. Also in 11th century, from Norway, the Vikings came up and had navigated to these regions. So it was not the voyages of discovery. It was already discovered. The unknown parts to these people had already been navigated by the Indians, by the Chinese, by the Vikings and different people. So we can't just say that this was the first time when human beings went there. Not human beings, but the different continent people went there. It was already discovered by different people. There were also many sailors who, without knowing the width of the oceans, were sailing across the Atlantic Ocean and had seen the consequences for them, because as the trading, that technology in ship got evolved, there was larger space for cargo and for equipment to defend themselves from the enemy ships, because during that time there were also many enemy ships that could attack them anytime or anywhere. So it was good to be alerted with equipment and with a lot of cargo. You have to go already. So many sailors were also there who, without knowing the width of the ocean, just went there sailing, and later they didn't know that it was not possible to see the land even after 33 days. We will see about the case of Christopher Columbus as well, how he sailed from different regions. The question that might rise in your mind that why did people have to go to these regions? Why did they seek for silver, gold, glory, titles? What was the reason for Spain and Portugal, countries like these, to go there? One may find answer to these questions in three terms that were religious, economic, and political. First, let's talk about economic. By the 14th century, the economy of Europe had fallen out, as we have seen in theme 6. What we saw was that plague had entered in Europe. Many other things had entered in Europe. The economy was falling of Europe. Many European countries we had seen. By the time the Turks conquered the Italian city Constantinople, it was the capital of there, so it was very hard for them to do trade. They were only doing trades with Turks. Later also they had to pay higher taxes on trade with Turks. That is why they were not satisfied with the condition or the situation in which they were in. That is why economic downfall had been seen by the Europeans, and that is why they were looking for an alternative. It was also good if more people could be converted into Christianity. Many devotees were there who thought that if more and more people could be converted into Christianity, it would be good for them. So that is why, as we have already seen the terms of crusades in theme 4 and maybe theme 6, in earlier themes, previous themes, we had seen that crusades happened. It was the religious wars between the Christianity and the Turks. We also have seen that they increased their trade with the Asian people, with the Asian spices, and that is why they were more and more looking for that. One alternative was Africa, West Africa, which they had already found, and quite many people were enslaved as well. Portugal, that was a very small country, got its independence from Spain in 1139, was the first to take step. There was a Prince Henry who was also known as a navigator. What he did was that he just attacked Africa. He attacked Africa, made the natives as slaves. He enslaved all of them. Many were killed as well. And a dust of precious metal, that is the gold, was flowing to them. Like they had a lot of gold, as there are a lot of gold mines in Africa. They got a lot of, you could say, gold or silver for them. So first was that they had an alternative Africa. Secondly, we have Spain. What Spain did was that its inspiration came from crusades. They had termed this Reconquista. Reconquista was actually the reconquest of Iberian Peninsula by the Christian kings. So that is why in terms of Reconquista, what they did was that they signed contracts with the kings. Sailors or big traders had signed a contract with the king. In that contract, the thing was that they would not, you could say, the king would have sovereignty. All the sailors, whoever, they had the power to rule over the newly conquered lands, newly found lands. The only thing was sovereignty to the king. They were also given some power by the king. So in short term, in Iberian Peninsula, we have seen Spain and Portuguese people, Spanish and Portuguese people were the first one to take a step, and they had seen so much consequences as well. It was also not easy, because as we have seen that the case of Incas of Peru, they also had something like the pyramid structure was different, so that even if the Incas chieftain was captured by the enemies, he could command over. The command would spread over. That only happened when he was captured in reality by the Spaniards. So we will see that later as well. So this is about the voyages of exploration, how people started to explore for economic reasons, as gold and metal or gold silver had disappeared from Europe, so they were not able to build to make their coins. The religious things, that is to convert more and more people in Christianity, the political, that they would have the right to rule over the newly conquered lands. So these three were the main reasons why these Spanish and Portuguese were excited, were so much crazy about finding new areas in this region, which they could not find there, but found later, but could not find at that time, found a different continent, that is America. Because earlier the concept in their mind was that there were only three continents, that is Europe, Asia and Africa. Africa was already in control of Europe. Asia, we had Mongols, Turks, these people were there. Besides that, they got to know a new continent, that is America, that was split in North America and South America later. Now the next topic here is the Atlantic crossing. So the Atlantic crossing. Now let's talk about Christopher Columbus, who discovered American region in 1492. Christopher Columbus, a Portuguese sailor, was a self-taught man who believed in his prophecies, who always sought for adventure and glory. He had believed in prophecies that he had destiny to discover the Indies region. Indies, that is India and the east of the countries. So it was his dream, or it was his destiny to discover these countries, this region actually. What he did was that he made some plans to sail over there, to make expeditions, and he also presented them before the Portuguese crown, only to have them turned down. Also, he had been inspired by a book that was written by 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. The book was Imago Mundi. In this book, he had read about the Indies region also and many other things. So that is why he wanted to start more and more adventure and glory. When his plan was not allowed by the Portuguese crown in 1492, he was lucky enough to be supported by the Spanish crown. That is why he is a Portuguese sailor sent by the Spanish king to the Atlantic crossing, to cross the Atlantic Ocean. On 3rd August 1492, he with all his crew members had started to sail off. They also had a now. Now in Spanish means that a heavy ship. So there was a now that was Santa Maria. Two small ships were also there named Pinta and Nina. So these were two small ships and one was a heavy ship. Christopher Columbus with his 40 crew members was commanding in Santa Maria. The other two were following. For 33 days they were just seeing the sea and sky. Nothing, no land could be found out. Nothing could be seen. Only the tranquility was there. Nothing besides the sea and sky was there. Many members were also discouraged and were demanded to return back. It was only on 6th October 1492 that they found some land. They could see the land which they thought was India, but actually it was 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. It was named by the Christopher Columbus as different regions as Bahamas. This name was also given by Christopher Columbus because in Spanish there is a word bajamar, that is, it is covered by shallow trees. This region was also covered with shallow trees. That is why this region is known as Bahamas today. In today's time, it is known as Bahamas. Besides that, as I've already told you, that in this region who lived were the Arawaks, who were very generous people, who invited them, you could say welcomed these Christopher Columbus and all his crew members, supported them, promoted them, gave a lot of things. Whatever they asked for, whatever Christopher Columbus asked for, they did give them. Even if they didn't, they still wanted to share it as if it was in their hearts. Even Christopher Columbus wrote in his logbooks about those people, that how generous they were. They were very kind and innocent people who preferred negotiation than a conflict. What happened then? This Christopher Columbus, without the consent of the local people, declared himself as the viceroy of that region. taking the support from the local tribes, that is Arawaks, they preferred conquering those bigger islands such as Cubaniscan, that is Cuba, which Christopher Columbus thought was Japan, such a big thing. Secondly was Hispaniola. Today the name is Hispaniola, for more and more adventure and glory and to find new things such as gold and silver. It was not a good thing, because when they were in their way, they had found some difficulties. That is, as I've already told you, that in Lesser Antilles they were Caribs, a very fierce tribe. So they were not happy with their comings, with their arrival. That is why they just started, without talking anything, they just started their attacks and something like that. That's when the most difficult time was for Christopher Columbus, because when he wanted to even return to his country, that is to Spain or to the king, it was difficult because the ships were now worm-eaten. We have worms that come over, and we also have termites as well. So those were termites, worm-eaten. Many people were homesick. Many people had a lot of illness. So it was quite difficult for him to go back to return. After that, 3 voyages followed it and found that this was not the Indus region. Instead, this was another region. You might have known that Christopher Columbus has said once that just 5 weeks and we have reached to another side of the world or the earth. You have seen that if any area is discovered by any person, then the name of that area is on the basis of that person or related to that person. For example, we have Amazon River. You know what? That when explorers went there, they were attacked by some fierce tribe who were just exactly like those Amazon women fighter in ancient Roman times. That is why that region, that rainforest and the river has been named as Amazon. So the same here applies. The thing that is contrasting to it is that Christopher Columbus, we have Columbus, a very small district in the US, the United States, and a northwest country in South America, that is Colombia. What is the most surprising fact is that he never went to explore these regions, and the regions that he went to explore, they were never named after him. So in Colombia, he never went there. In Columbus district of the US, he never went there to explore it, but it was named after it. The continent was named after a different person, that is Amerigo. He was a geographer and he had told something more and more. That is why this continent is known as America after his name, not after Christopher Columbus, because some contrasting things were there and maybe people did not see him as a good person, because now those tribes were also seeing the reality. So this was Voyages of Exploration by Christopher Columbus to American region. Where he wanted to go was Asia with Indies, Japan and those regions, but where he actually went was America, Atlantic Ocean he went there from. So it was really hard, because in sea you can't just find everything. During that time, the only thing that helped the sailors was the compass that was built in the 14th century. Was only used after many years in 15th century, because during that time people did not have a lot of use, but by 15th century a lot of people were using, a lot of sailors were using, as they had more and more requirement of it. Now the next topic here is Spain establishes an empire in America. So Spain establishes an empire in America. How did that happen? Let's talk about it. The Spanish conquest was mainly based in military things, military requirements, military equipment, such as use of gunpowder and horses. The local people were forced to do work in mines and plantations or to pay tribute. Also, the local chieftains had to find more and more resources of gold because of the greed of these Spaniards. What happened that very often these Spaniards were, in the initial phase, there were less people. There were less people by a lot of, there were many Spaniards. What they did was that they asked the local chieftains. The local chieftains had the responsibility to fulfill their greed. There was also a Spanish friar, that is Bartolome de Casas, who was a great severe critic of the Spanish conquerors. He stated that many of the tests of the swords of these conquerors were on the naked flesh of the Arawaks, you could say. So on the naked flesh there was testing of the swords. That's quite a horrible thing, macabre, you could say. What happened that these Spanish people, they were military conquest already. There were many Spaniards coming up, selling up was already there. What was most horrible during that time was a disease. It added to the ravages of those impacts, because this area had been isolated from the whole world. It was not doing so much trade with any other continent or something like that. So it was kind of isolated from the whole world. That is why the immunity of those people, the immune system of the natives was very low compared to Asians, Africans or the Europeans. So with Europeans there were also many diseases of the old world, that such as smallpox and some other diseases were there. So these natives thought that these were secret bullets or invisible bullets given shot at them by these Spaniards. So that was their kind of thinking. That is how they became extinct. You know what, that their way of living, all the Arawaks had been extinct because of this main cause. Either way they had to die, either by the Spaniards or by these diseases that had a lot of impact, not just on them, their way of life, their career, their all other things. With that, before this, you know that Columbus had sailed there and all the things started after that. After Columbus, there were successfully many conquests of the Spaniards in this region. You know, before this, there were two people who also had conquered the two main empires, that is the Aztecs and the Incas of the American region. Those two people were Henry Cortes, Henry Cortes, who conquered the area of the Aztecs. Secondly was Francisco Pizarro. This person conquered the area of Incas. Now these two were supported. As all of you know, for any expedition, what is important that you must have the support. If you are going to somewhere else, you must have the power to do something. That is why they were supported by the Spanish noblemen, officials working under them, so that they would give their equipment, their power. In return, they would get a booty, a part of booty from those conquered lands, as everyone had agreed for greed side of their mind for this gold and silver, for new resources, and for slave as well. That is why slave trade became more and more in this region. So overall, for Arawaks, this had a lot of disastrous consequences, a lot of impact, that their whole life changed just because they were so much generous. If only, just think about it, if the only history was changed, just think when Christopher Columbus went there and these people were the Caribs and had killed him, what would have happened? Something different would have happened. So this was like those native people were forced to do this or that and were literally killed, had become extinct. Now the next topic here is Cortes and the Aztecs. So Cortes and the Aztecs. Now this Cortes, that is Hernan Cortes, was the one who defeated the Aztecs in 1519. In 1519, he set sail from Cuba to Mexico, and where he wanted to conquer the Aztecs. The king at that time was Montezuma. He had already seen the aggressiveness of this person. That is why he sent an official for negotiation terms for peace things. On their way, there were very fierce fighters that were 𝓥𝓲𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪. These 𝓥𝓲𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪 were very fierce drivers and only submitted before Cortes. You know that Cortes had a lot of soldiers and horse and gunpowders. These soldiers were known as conquistadores. In Spanish, it was conquistadores. So when they were fighting with 𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓾𝓱🪋, they were very fierce fighters. Would not their dignity, pride were their main things. So they would never ever, they had thought that would submit before them. But it was only that when they, after a long fight, they had to submit before this person, and also had to become their allies in conquering the Aztecs and many more regions, not just Aztecs. So it was seen that a lot of massacre on their way, a lot of massacre of 𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪 was also seen by this Cortes. So there was a lot of massacre of those people by Cortes conquistadors. That is why there was a fear of him all over the Aztecs. The king himself was convinced that this person is an incarnation of an exiled god who has come back or returned to avenge himself. That is why he is such aggressive person who massacres many people and many other related things. That's when he came over in Aztec region, the king welcomed him very generously, then even took him to the heart of the city. This Cortes was very much surprised after seeing the city that was 5 times larger than the Madrid. Also, the population was about 100,000, twice that of Seville, the largest city of Spain. That is why it's very common to be astonished. Thereafter, people were also very terrorized by him. King Montezuma took him to the hearts of the city, also bestowed many gifts, showered him with many gifts, appreciation, praises, admirers, many entertainment programs, so that he would be convinced. People, on the other hand, had a lot of terror, fear. They were seeing as if they had given a shelter to a monster who could eat you anytime or anywhere. That is why it was like that. And the same thing happened. It was well founded. This person, Cortes, what he did was that he has arrested King Montezuma. On his name, he started to rule over the Aztec people. He also made Christianity more popular, promoting it in the temples, that in temples only the Christian images would be there. With a lot of compromise and negotiation, after compromising a lot of things, this King Montezuma decided that in this temple, Christian as well as Aztec god images would be. So it was compromised like that. Now after that, Cortes had to leave to Cuba for some reason. So he left deputy in charge for there and left for Cuba. And when he returned on 21st January of 1520, he had a lot of crisis in his hands. During a time when he was not there, what was happening was that more and more greed for gold and silver could be seen. That is a general uprising was there by the natives. Of course, it is common and natural that they would would have an uprising. That's when Alvarado ordered for massacre of all those people at the spring festival of Aztec at 𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓷. So there a lot of people were killed. So when this person Cortes returned, he had a lot of crisis in his hands. Then again the war, that Montezuma died for some unknown mysterious reasons. A new king was established. He had taken over the throne, and now there was a war between the Aztecs and Cortes. Cortes have seen a lot of things, that the bridges were broken, the sideways were also ruined, destructed, all the things were destroyed. That is why they were facing acute shortages of basic supplies of military equipment, whether it be food or water or something like that. That is why they were forced to retreat. And this Aztec side was kind of powerful during that time. So a lot of people were also killed by this side, that is Cortes side. Many 𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪, many conquistadors also killed, around 600. It was also known as the Night of the Tears, as many people were killed. That is why they were forced to retreat to the region 𝓒𝓱𝓪, from where 𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪 came up. Now they were making a new strategy against a newly formed king Cuauhtémoc. After this, Aztecs were facing their own problem of the diseases brought by these Europeans, the deadly disease smallpox. Many people died because of it, and seeing that again a war was beginning, again Cortes with his 30 horses and 100 soldiers came up to have a war. Then this was said that the Aztec side had seen the omens foretelling that their end was near. That is why the newly formed emperor killed himself, took up his life, and Cortes got his hands on the Aztecs. Now after 2 years, it took 2 years for him to defeat Aztecs completely properly. Then he became the new deputy general of New Spain, in not deputy general but general or military general of the New Spain in Mexico, was also praised by Charles V, the king of Spain, and of course gifts will be given and all those formalities will be filled up. So that is how the conquest of the Aztecs took place. You have seen that a lot of things went on and people just had to follow wherever they were asked to. Now next we shall talk about Pizarro and the Incas. So Pizarro and the Incas. Now let's talk about the conquest of the Incas people of Peru by the Francisco Pizarro. Now Pizarro, unlike Cortes, was uneducated and a poor person. He joined the military or the army in 1502 of the Caribbean. He had heard about the Inca city. It was a city of gold. It was a land of gold and silver. He had made countless attempts for it as well. Luckily, once when he was returning from his attempt to reach there, he found the king. He met king on his way and could show him the workmanship, the vase, the gold vase and different workmanship, artist work of gold and silver. That aroused the greed of the king. So he allowed this person to go and conquer that region and also giving him power, equipment, whatever he needed, and in return they will always of course he will get some part of the booty or the sovereignty rights. So that was the case. Now Francisco Pizarro thought that he would follow the pathway of Cortes, that is Hernan Cortes, but he was disconcerted. You know what, that the situation was different in this region, Incas compared to Aztecs. What happened that just now, at the time when he was thinking, a new king had taken the throne after a civil war, that was Atahalpa. This king, after a civil war, had taken the throne. When you could say Pizarro went in Incas, he was also welcomed very well. He was like, he suddenly just arrested the king. In return, king offered him a ransom, a room full of gold. The biggest ransom recorded in the history it was. Still Pizarro did not fulfill his promise, executed the king and started to rule over. So you could say that without keeping his promise, he just stayed. A lot of cruelty could be seen. It had become the occupation of the century. A lot of cruelty could be seen, brutal expression, brutal things were happening in the country, in the city, and a lot of people were also killed. Many people became slaves as well, were enslaved forcibly. Of course, no one would ever want to be a slave of only when they are forced to they would be. So that was the case in Incas. Besides that, there were also revolution, some kind of uprising by the natives in 1534, after which this person Pizarro with brutal operation repressed them. Then suddenly what happened that he had covered after that he also, the present day Bolivia was also found by him and took all the gold and silver of that region. So that was the case of Pizarro and the Incas. Now the next topic here is Cabral and Brazil. So Cabral and Brazil. Now you know what, the discovery of making an empire in Brazil was an accidental thing. There was a person whose name was Cabral, Pedro Alvarez Cabral, who had set sail to India actually, but in his way he made a wide loop to prevent the stormy winds. When he made a loop, he saw some piece of land. Surprisingly, it was mentioned in the map given to him by the Pope. So without any matters undisputingly, it was considered that it was their land because it was marked in the map given by the Pope as their land. So that is why disputably, he just thought that it was their piece of land. But he wanted to conquer India more than he wanted to conquer Brazil, because Brazil did not offer any kind of gold or silver, but India did. The only thing which could be exploited in Brazil was timber. There were a lot of Brazil wood trees. Thus, the name of the country became Brazil. That is why a lot of timber could be exploited. In return, the native people, what they did was that they just cut a lot of trees, and in return of those logs, they got some knives or some saws. Like, they were very much impressed by knives, these metal weapons, knives, saws, and combs and many other things. What would have happened that for a single knife or for a single comb, they would just bring a lot of hens, monkeys, parrots, cordon threads, and whatever these poor people had. So this was quite a big thing to happen, because just thinking about it, it's quite a big thing that they were ready to offer this much just for that thing. So it really impressed them a lot. So Brazil was conquered like that. In short terms, you could say that it was conquered, not actually conquered, but was like that. Now you know what, that once a native asked a French priest that why do you French and Portuguese people come here to take our land? Isn't your land sufficient for you to feed your family members? Now this land is able to nourish us. Even when we die, our children, our wives, our husbands, if she's a girl, this land is able to nourish us. Isn't that happening in your case as well? What happened that there was a war between the French and the Portuguese over this land, because both wanted to conquer, rule over this land. It was only that Portuguese won because they wanted to make colonies in the coastal areas, in the coast of the Brazil. That is why they won and had rule over there. And whom they did won with against was that French people of France, you could say. So Portugal, that was a small country, did have a lot of. Now people were settling over in that region. A lot of them, many of them were the war veterans of Goa, that is present in India. That is why a lot of cruelty could also be seen there. And many people, that sugarcane mills came up. Sugar mills came up more and more because sugarcane industry could go up if there was a lot of sugarcane in Brazil. So with that sugarcane, sugar could be made in sugar mills and it could be sold to European markets. The only problem was that it was hot and humid climate. So none of the natives wanted to work for them. What they did was that earlier they used to work, but when they saw the temperature, the climate, they just left. Then they were extorted, they were kidnapped by these Europeans because they never want to do the work by themselves. So these Portuguese kidnapped them and forcibly enslaved them, made them slaves, and to work for them for their mills. The thing that happened was that all the natives wanted to run away. They just ran away to the villages, to the forests where they came from, and they were surprised to see that there were no forest villages anymore. Only forests were there, but there were no villages. They were only well laid out European cities, the urban culture that came up. The only thing here could be seen, that alternative had to be seen. That is why Portuguese, what they did was that they turned to West Africa. It was the beginning of the slave trade. They turned to West Africa, took slaves from there, from European merchants took slaves from there and went to America to sell there and to work there in mills. So that was the case, and it is just the opposite of the Incas conquest and the Aztecs conquest. Their people were not slaves, they were working. A lot of the population was working, and even if they weren't, they were a little bit of them were slaved as well. But here none of them, like not neither the Aztecs nor the Incas were choosing an alternative for slaves, turning to West Africa or some other countries or some other continents. But here they had to, Portuguese had to choose for an alternative to work for them. That was marking the beginning of the slave trade. So now the next topic here is conquest, colonies and the slave trade. Conquest, colonies and the slave trade. Now let's talk about the conquest, colonies and what overall happened in the Americas. You know what, that from the 15th century, before that people were not able to, people were unknown to the ocean routes, the passages from ocean to ocean. They were never able, I'm talking about the Europeans precisely, they were never able to sail in the Atlantic Ocean. Just let it be, they were only sailing in seas with their ships. Just leave it alone that they could sail to the Pacific or the Indian Ocean. They never. It was only in the late 15th and the early 16th century that they started that. That also led to the colonization and a lot of making empires in different parts of America, North, Central and South America. Different empires, the most powerful empires such as Aztecs and Incas were also conquered. You know what, that each year 100 of ships filled with gold and silver would go from America to the Europe region. So you might be thinking that only Spain and Portuguese are the countries that benefited from it, but it was not. The countries bordering the Atlantic Ocean such as England, Holland, Belgium, these countries were the ones that benefited the most because they were at the borders. They also sent expeditions and from America took more and more new products and introduced it to the Europeans, notably potatoes and chilies. They also took it to other countries like India. So you could say that they were also doing the smuggling up things from here to there so that they would have more and more money because they only had greed for money or gold or silver. And this all had an impact on the natives, disastrous impact on the natives, both psychologically and physically. Physically, as there were a lot of diseases, epidemics going on. You know what, that on the eve of the arrival of all those conquerors, the population of whole Americas was 70 million. A century and a half later, it was turned down to 3.5 million. That is so much. You could say that a lot of people had died in this method, in this whole process, because it was such a thing due to diseases, due to conquerors that killed them, or epidemics they had. As I've already told you, that their immune system was very much weak. Then after, their psychological way of thinking, their fundamental values were also differing, as we had seen that Incas and Aztecs and the Spanish people, what happened that they had a lot of avarice for gold and silver that were never in the Aztecs and in the Incas region. So in quite terms, you could say that these people had psychological effect as well as physical effect. Also, it remarked the beginning of slave trade. In slave trade, what actually happened that the merchants from Europe went to Africa to buy slaves. There a lot of slaves would be packed in voyages and would be brought to America, where the slaves would have to work in the mills, in the plantations, in the mines, or in anywhere. So slave trade was also started. In 1602, Philip II declared that the abolition of slave trade, but inside secretly he had started continuing this slave trade, had given his sign to continue this slave trade. It was only in 1609 that it took to a head and a law was made that enraged the European merchants who wanted more and more slaves at cheap cost as well. Within 2 years, they just forced the government to change the law so that slavery would again be started. Between the years of 1550s and 1880s, during the time when slave trade was abolished, was not allowed in Brazil. Alone in Brazil, 3,060,000 people. Slavery was abolished, not the slave trade was abolished. So slavery, that means converting the natives into slaves actually. So 3,600,000 slaves were brought from Africa to the region of Brazil. That was half of the amount of the whole slaves brought from Africa to Americas. So in short term, you could say that Brazil had a lot of African slaves brought up by the Europeans. It also said that they had a lot of exploitation sufferings. By 1780s, more and more arguments started about the African slaves. It was said that historians argued that even before European conquest, Africa had slaves. When Europeans gave African people themselves were capturing young men and women to be slaves in exchange for American things such as potatoes, chilies, and tobacco, cocoa, those kind of things. So that happened. Also, there is an autobiography written in 1789 by a free slave who said that slaves were considered as a part of family in Africa. See, here it is in Africa, so we can say that they were considered as a part of family in Europe, in America as well. Besides that, it was only after 20th century, in the late 20th century, that there were more and more people, historians coming up saying that there is this historian that is Williams. He said that he highlighted the sufferings of all those Africans. So you could say that they had a lot of sufferings. African slaves have been from a long time. They had a lot of sufferings as slaves they were turned into. So that was about the conquest, colonies how they were made in different parts of the world, and the slave trade. Now the next and last topic of this chapter is epilogue. So epilogue, let's talk about it. Now you know what, that in the early 19th century, it was that many those cities, so those countries that were under the European European settlers' control, started to rebel against them. They wanted to have independent countries. Just as the case in 1776, the 30 North American states got independent after a long rebellion thing against Britain and formed the US, the United States of America. So in that term, many new countries also emerged to have independent countries without any sovereignty with those other Europeans. So that's what happened. Also, in today's world, the South America is also called as Latin America because two of the most used languages in that part are Spanish and Portuguese that have origin from Latin. So this is all how the things turned up. We also had Jesuit missionaries, Jesuit people who also went to Brazil during that time and said that there should be interactions, good interactions, soft interactions with the natives of that region. We should spread Christianity in a manner, you could say in joyous manner, not just forcing them upon them. And the biggest thing was that they were against slavery. So they were quite good people. Of course, all the conquerors, all other people would be enraged with them. So that is how it all started and how it all ended. Now next chapter, next section would be started as this section has ended. Next section would be started, different chapters are also there. So we'll talk about the later story of these things as well. So this is all we have covered in this video. I've covered all about this chapter, about everything about America and Europe. We have seen there was literally a confrontation of cultures as different type of people from different communities were confronting each other, having conflicts. Not just a mere term conflict would be suitable, but disastrous things were happening over there. So that's all for this video. I've covered all the topics and subtopics. The next themes of this book will be covered in the further upcoming videos. So stay tuned for the upcoming videos. Thank you very much.